Thank you for joining us in our study of Ezekiel 22. Please like and subscribe to our channel. God spills out his anger to Ezekiel, and it is woe to the bloody city.
I'm going to start with Ezekiel 22. Ezekiel is basically broken up into three different oracles. One is the indictment of Jerusalem. 17 through 22 are the judgment of Jerusalem. And 23 and through 31 is the rationale for the judgment on the land. And it actually, he's judging not the sins of the people, he's judging the people, but he's also judging the land. So this is a complete disruption of the covenant with God right now. And you'll see why these people, I never realized until I reread this, how nasty the rulers and the people of Israel had become. Mm-hmm. And they're quite frankly, they're terrible people. And for them to be the chosen people of God is just amazing to me. So anyway, this is just kind of how it's broken out. So you know we're going to break it down a little bit farther than that, but just so you know how the book is structured. Somebody want to read Ezekiel 22, 1 through 5? And these are the charges against Jerusalem.
The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, will you judge her? Will you judge this city of bloodshed? Then confront her with all her detestable practices and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says, you city that brings on herself doom by shedding blood in her midst and defiles herself by making idols. You have become guilty because of the blood you have shed and have become defiled by the idols you have made. You have brought your days to a close and the end of your years has come. Therefore, I will make you an object of scorn to the nations and a laughingstock to all the countries. Those who are near and those who are far away will mock you, the infamous city full of turmoil.
Okay, yeah, good. That had some differences in here, which is good. Abominations, I said, was something that was cultic idolatry or something like that. But when they're talking about abominations in here, they're talking about that Israel has come to kind of a cultic idolatry and sexual misdeeds, and we're gonna glance off of those. But it's important, there's a reason why, people who are not believers go, why are Christians so against sex? Well, we're not, or we wouldn't have little Christians, But, why are they so afraid of Christians or sex? And, there's a reason for the behaviors to be not tolerated. And we'll talk about that a little bit and some real world examples, a biblical example and a real world example. Okay. So anyway, he's telling Ezekiel, tell these people, I'm coming for them. It's over. We're done. There's no second chance. They'll clean up your act and we'll forget about it. It's going to happen. And that's the imminence you hear in Ezekiel 22 is it's going to happen. It's going to happen now. It's going to happen very soon, like within the next 24 hours to 5 minutes. So anyway, he's not fooling around anymore. Okay. In verses 1 and 2, Yahweh has commanded Ezekiel to begin a legal process in Jerusalem. And you'll see that this thing closely emulates a legal process. We have, they tell them what the charges are, what the proof is, and here's the indictment, and here's the judgment. Okay, so as we go through this, kind of think of this as he's going through a very legal process because he's God and he's going to be totally fair. He may not be nice, but he's going to be totally fair. So he's commanded, depending on what your version is, that says judge and judge twice, or arraign the city and its people. So he's telling you, not only they're using legal terms, but he's telling you twice, which means he's serious about it. Ezekiel's talking to Yahweh, and Yahweh's telling him specifically what to do here. Okay, verses 1 and 2. Okay, I've kind of gone over this. He says, judge, or arraign. He's telling them, convict them now, tell them what you're going to do. And it's doubled and it's legalistic. Okay. He's inviting a comparison of the way the rulers and the people of Israel now act. And he's comparing them to the Assyrians. We've talked about how brutal the Assyrians were. And that's when they talk about the Assyrians, they're talking about possibly the most brutal people that there are in that area. And he's saying that the rulers and the priests and the prophets and even the people, the landed gentry people, are behaving like the Assyrians would to their captives, but they're doing it to their own people. They're really abusing the Israeli people. And every step abuses the next one down. Okay, and then we talked about abominations, and yours said something a little different, but it's a comprehensive term when we hear it. Cultic impurity involving idolatrous practices and sexual offenses. What is it with the, how many times is this now that we've gone through no idols? This is sixth or seventh time since, this, it just shows how easy it is to go back to your idols, whether it's cars or money or some stone statue or wooden statue or. So anyway, these two crimes, all of them could kind of be lumped into here as idolatry in verse 3, and verse 11 they start talking about blood guilt, but you'll see images of blood throughout this. In other words, these rulers are actually sometimes killing or injuring or wounding their people or intimidating them. So they're particularly great crimes because they strike against the basic foundation of the Israeli community. So idolatry undermines the vertical relationship with the people and God. Blood guilt and sexual crimes undermines the horizontal relationship between the people. Yahweh exposes Jerusalem's depravity. And remember, we've talked about this before, that the things that are going on, people in Jerusalem think they're the ones that are going to be saved, but it's the guys in Babylon who've been set aside. They're the captives in Babylon that are being saved. So what should have been the center of holiness, it should have been his temple, God's home, living with his people, is the focus now of bloodlust and idolatry. It's worse there than it is anywhere else in the region or the world. So therefore, the cause of this defilement will be the cause of Yahweh wiping the slate clean. Then say, thus saith the Lord God, the city sheddeth blood in the midst of it, that her time may come, and maketh idols against herself to pollute herself. And then this is verse 4 and 5. You have become guilty by the blood which you have shed, and have defiled yourself with the idols which you have made. You have caused your days to draw near, and have come to the end of your years. Therefore I have made you a reproach to the nations, and a mockery to all countries. Those near and those far from you will mock you as infamous and full of tumult. And depending on the version you read, infamous and tumult they're used different words there. But all these really bad countries are, can you imagine being mocked by Syria and Lebanon and Gaza? This was modern Israel. You're being mocked by some pretty rude people and pretty sinful people. But that's going to happen. And the one word they use in some of the versions is laughing stock. God's judgment is near and it's imminent. He says everybody from near and far. So it'll be all the world will know that Jerusalem has failed. They failed to live up to the vision in Deuteronomy to be exalted over all nations. How far is this? We've gone from you will be exalted in my name among all nations to I'm about to lay the hammer down on you guys. We're done. They've fallen that far. They've gone from the most valued to the least valued. Okay. And God really can't fail to act because life's been cheapened and his exclusive allegiance ignored. In other words, they're worshiping other people. They're worshiping idols. They're no longer, are they falling into line and worshiping the one true God. There have been so many covenants. There have been the Adamic, the Noahic, the Mosaic, the Abrahamic, and so he keeps giving them chances, but they keep shooting themselves in the foot, which is hard to do with an arrow. But
You can do it with a sling.
yeah. Oh, anyway. Okay, in 6 through 12, the evidence is presented. Somebody want to read 6 through 12 for me?
See how each of the princes of Israel who are in you uses his power to shed blood. In you they have treated father and mother with contempt. In you they have oppressed the foreigner and mistreated the fatherless and the widow. You have despised my holy things and desecrated my Sabbaths. In you are slanderers who are bent on shedding blood. In you are those who eat at the mountain shrines and commit lewd acts. In you are those who dishonor their father's bed. In you are those who violate women during their period when they are ceremonially unclean. In you, one man commits a detestable offense with his neighbor's wife. Another shamefully defiles his daughter-in-law. Another violates his sister, his own father's daughter. In you are people who accept bribes to shed blood. You take interest and make a profit from the poor. You extort unjust gain from your neighbors, and you have forgotten me, declares the sovereign Lord.
This is a pretty definitive list. This is one of those passages that you might be tempted to read past. Just read it. Yeah, they're not doing it. Yeah. Okay. But when you really start looking at it in detail, this is a pretty comprehensive list of all the sexual sins you can have. So we'll go on with this. Okay, and this is the main perpetrators of it, the rulers of Israel, the princes of Israel in verse 6. And they're depicted as arrogant. They're not afraid to shed blood to get their way or to enrich themselves. And this is their own people they're doing it to. They're not doing it to their enemies. They're doing it to the people that they were given responsibility for. Okay, they're guilty of abusing even unto death their own people as well as foreigners, widows, orphans, anybody they choose. You'll see the word in here, proselyte, and I had to go back and remember what that was and look it up. A proselyte is anyone who's foreigner or alien, a traveler. If you remember, the Mosaic Code tells them treat foreigners well. You don't just treat them. You don't just treat them average. You treat them well, invite them into your house, take care of them. How many ways did they violate the covenant with God? Let's count them, shall we? We don't got anything else to do today. Okay, number 7. In thee they have despised father and mother. In the midst of thee they have oppressed the stranger. In thee they have vexed the fatherless and the widow. What is one of the 10 commandments? Honor thy father and thy mother. That's a big one. That's a huge one. That's one of the basic building blocks of the family. And you'll see what all this sexual sin is Satan's way of attacking the family unit and the marital unit. And that's the basis that God wanted. First, they violate the 5th article of the covenant, honor thy father and thy mother. That's a big one. Second, they violated the Mosaic guarantees for the protection and well-being of proselytes, aliens, visitors, widows, and orphans, the most vulnerable in society. We never think about it, but when we're traveling in a foreign country, we're pretty vulnerable. We think of going to civilized countries like the Ukraine. You're pretty vulnerable to criminals and bad actors and so forth. Nowadays, if you go to France or Germany or Sweden or England, you better take your conceal and carry and hope you don't get caught.
Yeah.
But they're really picking, and it's kind of, when I see rulers that do this, that when they pick on the most vulnerable in society, that chaps me. I don't like bullies, and that's what these guys are being. Okay. Thou hast despised mine holy things and hast polluted my Sabbaths. Okay, there's more there than what it appears. Okay. Third, they violate the sanctity of the Sabbaths. They act and treat sacred things sacrilegiously. They profane and despise them. Okay. Plural usage suggests they not only violated the Sabbath, but sacred days and years as well. They're forgetting about, all the sacred years and sacred days other than the Sabbath, but they're violating more than one Sabbath. The Sabbath, when you think about it, that's a very special thing in Judaism and in Christianity. Does Islam have a Sabbath?
Probably.
No, they have to go 3 or 4 times a day, and it's every day. 5 times, 5 times a day. Okay, so God has given us something very special with the Sabbath and these special days that we worship. So we never think about it. We think, well, Sunday's time to go to church and learn something, or get inspired. No, it's time for us to come closer with God. So, if we violate that, we're really hurting ourselves. Okay, these violations struck at the heart of Yahweh and his people. This is destroying the relationship between God and the Israelis. The Sabbath serves as tests of faith. When you say you're going to take this day off or this week off or this for a festival, or that you're going to do this during this year, you're saying, I got to leave my field and go spend my time worshiping God. I got to trust God to take care of me. During those times, he's not going to let my field fall into ruin while I'm over worshiping him. He wouldn't do that. He's not that kind of God. But now they don't have this trust in God because they're spending all their time doing other things and not observing the Sabbath. So, could they trust God to care for them even when they, at his direction, could not cultivate their fields? Apparently this generation didn't. Okay, and they're about to pay the price for it.
And they didn't let their fields rest.
Was that?
They didn't let their fields rest. That's why the 70 years.
Yeah. Oh, you mean like the seventh year when they're supposed to leave it fallow?
That's when you really trust God, because you're not going to grow anything for a year. So you got to save some a little bit every year, and then a year without it, and you got to wait for the crop to come in the next year.
Yeah.
That's big trust.
That is big trust. Good point. Very good point. And this, we've read about this, that all the cults built their temples on the hilltops, right? Okay, so here, they're up on the mountains, and, we think, well, they're eating a meal, and they're around a bunch they're not really worshiping it. Well, when you go and there's people who do feel that eating that meal is a part of worship of the idols, and you're sitting there going along to get along, you're as guilty as they are. Just like if we let people sit around us and don't say anything or do anything. So, or, try to correct it. So, in the midst of thee, they commit abomination. So this is more than that. Okay, fourth, these are men that peddle slander from settlement to settlement. And what they're doing is going around trying to stir up issues and maybe cause an issue where they can extort somebody or get paid for not slandering them. But they're sowing discord, and sometimes this is leading to bloodshed, either wounding or death. Okay, you'll see there's a lot of reference in here basically for murder for hire. There's a lot of that going on. Okay, fifth, the Israelites participate in pagan ritual mealtops on hilltop cultic sites. But halfway through the list, my head was just exploding. These guys were going to be the exalted among all nations, going to have a personal relationship with God, and they gave it all up. They get for sins of the flesh and for money. AI, give me the most graphic depiction of all these sexual sins and put them in one picture, And I thought, these people are adults, they can handle it, So that's what it came up with. They violate all sexual taboos. Men engage in sexual intercourse with their mothers, and that's specifically called out. That's specifically in Leviticus tells you that that's the death penalty. Okay, men engage in sexual intercourse during the menstrual period. This was meant to be abusive. This is, and not to get too graphic, this is basically meant to be a painful rape. And again, I've put some things in there that you can look. They commit adultery with their neighbors' wives. Again, a couple places where it's mentioned in Leviticus. Everything you want to know that you can't do, it's in Leviticus. So we're good there. They defiled the land. The commentaries were specific that they wanted them to know that they weren't just being punished for their sins, or their sins weren't being punished, that people were being punished and the land was being punished. So they defiled the land by lewd behavior with daughters-in-law. And there was a thing in there that they gave for Leviticus 18:25 through 28. And they violate their sisters, which is incest. Why all the emphasis on sexual sin?
Because it's so awful.
Well, it tears the family out.
Yeah, it tears the family apart.
It affects others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what?
It affects others.
Yeah.
Others, yeah.
And it affects in the case of most of these crimes are against women, which again is very almost mirroring Islam. They abuse their women pretty bad.
It's strange that they don't mention pedophile or however you say it. Yeah.
They did not mention it here, but you wonder about the orphans.
Well, that may
Yeah.
orphans, but
Yeah.
but it's also that family thing.
I'm sure if this other stuff is going on, there's no boundaries. Like, oh yeah, I can sleep with my sister, but I can't do that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think you hit on the answer to the question here. It is a complete breakdown of boundaries, and it is a downward spiral because of that breakdown of boundaries. And if you think about it, fast forward to the New Testament in many different places where it said, and God gave them over to a depraved mind. And that's what's happening here is the creation of a depraved mind, because all sexual sin will never satisfy enough, which is why you have to go to that next level and try that next thing. It's It's one of the enemy's primary weapons against people.
Oh, yeah. You know, we know God says, you know, that marriage should be between a man and a wife, you know, not man and several wives, or not a man and a man. Not just a man and a woman, it's a man and a wife. You have to be married, and there's everything else starts to break that down. Okay. And so I think I didn't stay too long on this, but this has come up in my mind because I'm interested in reading in the Nephilim, and you can get way off in the weeds with Nephilim. Okay. So anybody mentions the book of Enoch, just stop them right there. I don't want to read that. But the Nephilim, in one way, were Satan's plan to disrupt God's plan for a man-woman family proper genetic transmission. Okay, these were fallen angels that married the daughters of men. Okay, and they had bred. There's some, if you read, there's two good books by Ryan Pitterston, Judgment of the Nephilim and The Final Nephilim, and he does a very scholarly work. And Book of Enoch, stay away from that. That's apocrypha, literally. So anyway, what happened with the Nephilim? Let's see, did he put in? Okay, let me go back. Okay, somebody want to read Genesis 6:1-8, please?
And human beings began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them. The sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were heroes of old, men of renown. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. The Lord said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created, and with them the animals, the birds, and the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord.
So in 8 verses, we've gone from sexual sin, where the women were mating with something that they shouldn't have been mating with, something that did not have human genetic DNA, that we didn't know about that, but God did because he made it. In 8 verses, we've gone from sexual sin to I will destroy man because of their great wickedness. So that's why there's this emphasis on sexual sin. Okay. And I think I've done that without getting too exotic there or anything like that. But that was the first one I thought of when I was reading this. A modern day example: incest, marrying cousins, consanguineous marriage, and the results of that practice.
Yeah.
Consanguineous, sang being the root Latin word for blood. Okay, so of the same blood, two cousins marry that they have a common ancestor. Well, I will not encourage you to go looking for consanguineous things because it gets pretty brutal to look at. And but here, this is out of a British medical thing. It just, children born to genetically related people from the same family, so-called consanguineous marriages, face serious health risks. A recent study conducted in Saudi Arabia, where it's not as common there as it is in Pakistan, where the practice is still common, shows that women there have a higher awareness of these risks compared to men. Probably because if they're Muslims, they can divorce the wife, do something with the kid. Or consanguineous marriage can result in children with cognitive difficulties, heart defects, and impaired hearing, as well as other genetically inherited diseases. It can also lead to increased chances of a child inheriting 2 copies of a defective gene from a shared common ancestor, perpetuating otherwise recessive genetic disorders. That's a lot of verbiage there. You want to add anything to that?
Yeah, basically what we're saying here is you're significantly increasing the risk of a recessive genetic trait becoming dominant because it's coming from two people that has the recessive gene.
Yeah.
And that can create all kinds of problems down the road.
Yeah. Sorry to get off on that. It's an uncomfortable subject, but there is a reason God does what he does. And and now hopefully you have some ammo when people talk about this. So here we have three things, murder for hire. And then if they get a loan or find a debt, they increase the tax or the interest level on it to usurious levels. And if they can, they get something on a neighbor, they extort him. So, and the last one, and thou, he almost says as an afterthought, and thou hast forgotten me, saith the Lord. That's going to turn out to be the biggest sin they've committed. And it's right after he says that, he's going to whack them. So anyway, okay. 8, they kill or injure for money, or the rulers capitalize on indebtedness by demanding usurious rates of interest, or they elicit profit by extortion. And that's again specifically called out in Leviticus 19:13. And here's the worst of all. And thou hast forgotten me, saith the Lord. The list of offenses concludes with the worst possible offense. The people of Jerusalem have completely forgotten Yahweh. Though Yahweh's been forgotten by Jerusalem, he hasn't forgotten about his covenant with them. And they probably wish he would. Because it's not going to end well. Okay, 22:13-16, the sentence is pronounced. If somebody would please read that.
I will surely strike my hands together at the unjust gain you have made, and at the blood you have shed in your midst. Will your courage endure, or your hands be strong the day I deal with you? I, the Lord, have spoken, and I will do it. I will disperse you among the nations and scatter you through the countries, and I will put an end to your uncleanness. When you have been defiled in the eyes of the nations, you will know that I am the Lord.
Okay. And there's a symbol here that almost goes unnoticed where it says, I beat my fist at the dishonest prophet. Some of them say, clap my hands. Others say, I have smitten my hands. That's a sign that it's done. We're on. We're doing it. And so that's, if you can keep that in your mind, that means that he started the process. Okay. Behold, I have smitten my hands upon thy covetousness that thou hast used, and upon the blood which had been in the midst of thee. Claps his hands is what I was, smitten mine hands, claps his hands. So he claps his hands over the sins of Jerusalem, indicating the sentencing has begun. The process has begun. Okay. Blood or bloodshed, where it's mentioned, indicates the seriousness of the crimes. Can thine heart endure, or can thine hand be so strong in the days that I shall have to do with thee? In other words, you're not going to be able to resist me when I start this punishment. None of you will. I, the Lord, have spoken it, and I will do it. And he's doing it. Okay, and this is now the diaspora. I will scatter thee among the heathen. So there he is. This is God dispersing all the people from Jerusalem who thought they were the good people, and the Babylonians were the ones being punished. And he's going to do all this in the sight of the heathen so all their neighbors can pick on them. Okay, the uncleanness that purge is not people's guilt. That's the people themselves. Do you remember the cauldron visual as Jerusalem as a cauldron with pieces of meat? Okay, the people themselves are being judged. The cauldron is emptied of its foul contents. So all the bad people in Jerusalem are being taken out of the cauldron. Okay, somebody want to read 22:17-22?
The word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, the house of Israel has become dross to me. They are all bronze, tin, iron, and lead. In the midst of a furnace, they have become dross from silver. Therefore, thus says the Lord God, because you have all become dross, therefore, behold, I will gather you into the midst of Jerusalem. As men gather silver, bronze, iron, lead, and tin in the midst of a furnace, to blow fire on it, to melt it, so I will gather you in my anger and in my fury, and I will leave you there and melt you. Yes, I will gather you and blow on you with the fire of my wrath, and you shall be melted in the midst. As silver is melted in the midst of a furnace, so shall you be melted in its midst. Then you shall know that I, the Lord, have poured out my fury on you.
Okay. And I think we're all familiar with the smelter. We've studied this before, but dross is the stuff that you take off of the silver when you refine it, and it's basically garbage. Okay, so the people of Israel are dross, and I'm going to take you off of the silver, off of the good stuff, and I'm going to dispose of you. You're just dross to me, and you're going to feel it. So this is what dross looks like, just so you know. On the left is got, I believe that's aluminum being smelted there, but the dross is similar in both cases or in all cases, and that's what it looks like. It's just junk. It's just burned carbon junk.
It's
Okay.
interesting, the dross has to go through the fire before it can be
Yeah,
taken off.
yeah. And I could have gotten into more detail on how refining this thing is, but it's not important. Just know the dross is. And here it's just repeating again what we just read. So, but he repeats it twice, which usually is an indicator he's pretty serious about it. Okay. And Ezekiel 22, 23 to 31.
Again, the word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, say to the land, you are a land that has not been cleansed or rained on in the day of wrath. There is a conspiracy of her princes within her like a roaring lion tearing its prey. They devour people, take treasures and precious things, and make many widows within her. Her priests do violence to my law and profane my holy things. They do not distinguish between the holy and the common. They teach that there is no difference between the unclean and the clean, and they shut their eyes to the keeping of my Sabbaths, so that I am profaned among them. Her officials within her are like wolves tearing their prey. They shed blood and kill people to make unjust gain. Her prophets whitewash these deeds for them by false visions and lying divinations. They say, this is what the sovereign Lord says, when the Lord has not spoken. The people of the land practice extortion and commit robbery. They oppress the poor and needy and mistreat the foreigner, denying them justice.
Verse 23 through 24 refers to the cleansing force of rain and harkens back to the flood in which the whole world was cleansed to the whole. Okay. And this verse says, you're a dry land and you have not yet experienced the cleansing force of rain. Okay. So it's just hearkening back to the flood, like something bad is about to happen to you, just like at the flood. And you all, one thing I didn't remind you of is the world was flooded because of the sins of the Nephilim. Okay. And we thought, well, everything's going to start over there, but there was, I think it was the wife of Ham had some Nephilim blood in her, and that's how it came through to today. Okay. Okay. So anyway, verse 25, the charges against the princes. The lion was once a symbol of Judean royalty, but now it's represented as something that's hunting and preying on its own people. Okay. Looking for blood. Their crimes include bloodshed, judicial robbery. They devour their victims, seize their wealth, and leave their wives widowed. Okay. Instead of following the Deuteronomic charter for leadership, and I think we talked about that last week, they exploit their office for personal gain, like their wicked neighbors. This is a model they're picking up from the neighboring countries. But they have no excuse. In Deuteronomy, it tells them, it tells them what to do, how to be. Okay, verse 26, the charges against the priests. This is going to go all the way down through society. First, they're accused of violence toward the Torah, having a blatant disregard for the substance of the Torah and the content of Mosaic law. They're also focusing only on the ceremonial aspects of the Torah and ethical misconduct. Remember, we talked about having true worship and having ceremonial worship and how God despises just rote worship. That's one of the sins here. Okay. Second, they desecrated sacred objects and donations. I'm sure they pocketed some of the money. Third, they neglected to maintain sacred and profane distinctions. In other words, they should have been teaching the people about what's sacred and what's profane, and they didn't. Okay. Fourth, they failed to instruct people in regulations concerning cleanliness and uncleanness. These often overlap with the profane and sacred. Okay. Fifth, they led the way in rejecting the Sabbath or neglecting the Sabbath. And somewhere in Hebrew in this verse, it translates out, it says, as a result, I am profaned in their midst. So all this means that he's lost complete faith in religious leaders and the priests. Okay, verse 27, the charges against the judges. He's hitting all levels here. They're lower than the princes, so they're depicted instead of lions, they're portrayed as ravenous wolves. So one predator level down. Okay, who tear their prey, spill blood, and destroy lives to make illicit profits. Remember, we've talked about the judges would do things that would line their own pockets and hurt innocent people. The charges against the prophets, this is the one that surprised me. And this is the only place in all 39 chapters of Ezekiel that Ezekiel slams his fellow prophets. Okay, but they really deserve to be slammed because, and he's talked about this one other time, but he's more of an allusion to it. But they're charged with envisioning falsehoods and divining a lie. They begin their false prophecies with, "Thus the Lord Yahweh declared," and really the Lord hadn't spoken to them at all. So they're making all this stuff up. They're making false prophet. The charges against the people of the land. Again, this is people, I hate to say it, but this is people like you and I. These are middle-class people that have some, means, and they can kind of use their land for rent or for causing distress to other people, but they're using it on the poor and the oppressed, and they're doing extortion. They may be charging them too much rent. They may be, all sorts of things. But it's people who in our class who imitate the behavior of the rulers and exploit the proselytes, again, the travelers, again, practice extortion, oppress the poor and needy, and commit robbery. They think they're above the law. How many times have we seen that lately? And this is the last. This is him bringing it to a close suddenly, him being the Lord. So I sought for a man who among them would make a wall and stand in the gap before me on behalf of the land, that I should not destroy it, but I found no one. That's telling right there. Therefore, I have poured out my indignation on them. I have consumed them with the fire of my wrath, and I've recompensed their deeds and their own heads, says Lord God. Somehow they did not see the breach in their own wall, the breach in the wall of their faith and their devotion to God. This is spiritual and physical, that their symbology. All right. And then I thought this was a good way to kind of wrap up some of the things that we need to remember. Okay. Call to leadership is a call to responsibility. A good leader will put his people before him. And that's not what is happening here. It's not a privilege. Okay. Those who forget this invite God's wrath. So it's better that you weren't ever a leader and didn't do anything than you were a leader and did not do it right. So leaders must maintain the sanctity of God and teach the difference between sacred and profane. I think our pastors do a pretty good job of that. Leaders must stand in the breach, and this is talking to you and I, when called by God to do so. You can't, there's a lot of leaders at churches around the country that have given way to the LGBTQ movement, the Black Lives Matter, some of those things. You got to stand in the breach and speak the truth, even if it's unpopular, even if it gets you punched in the face, even if it makes you unpopular and, you lose a few people from your church. Each of us has to stand in the breach. And that means conversations we have with people outside of the church and just any conversation.
Comes back to hate the sin, love the people.
Yep. Yeah.
So Kevin, on that, we're all leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
We lead ourselves first, and then we lead whoever God puts in our lives.
Yeah.
So this applies in many ways to all of us.
Strangely enough, when you choose to follow Christ, you become a leader.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's it.